know everyone must be pretty tired by now, so I'm going to try my best not to bore you and keep this exciting. I'm also not going to ask how many people have heard of Reach, because probably none. So I'm not going to get any hands on that one. So I'll quickly tell you about Reach and a little bit about me, and then we'll get started with the talk. So Reach recently renamed because they want to be reaching everyone in the UK. They're the UK's largest content and news publisher. Some of these brands you may know, you may not know. They basically house all of these brands essentially. So there's local brands, regional brands, and national news brands. And according to ComScore data, obviously I've taken this from one of the official slides of the company, but apparently we're the 6th largest site reached just after Microsoft. So we had 1 billion page views in January and approximately around 38 to 39 million active users, which is quite a lot for a news company. And we also kind of have like subsidiary brands like in your area on top. So what we do is hyper-local news. So a lot of what we do is provide information to people, do in-house and other advertising, and yeah, try to make them have fun and keep them engaged. Okay, so before getting into the details of hypothesis-driven development, let's look at it from the very, very outside. All of us over here are trying to do one thing, right? It's us, and then it's our desired outcome. And there lies a land of opportunity in between that. And for a lot of us, the desired outcome is different. For some of us, it's keeping people happy. For some of us, it's making a lot of cash. And for some of us, it's making a real difference in the world. But we've got this land of opportunity that sits between us and the desired outcome. And in an ideal world, what we do is that we build something to get there. And we've got a product that basically bridges a gap between us and this desired outcome. Job done, we can go home. But we basically need a reality check because things don't work like that. What actually happens in the product and development world is that there's a lot of things that are different. Firstly, we're not just one whole, we consist of fragmented teams. There are a lot of different people that we work with and we need to get them to be on the same team. Secondly, the desired outcome is also not just one thing. It's a bit fuzzy, there's lots of different things going on. Everybody in that fragment, all different fragments also have a different opinion of what the desired outcome is. And quite often, we don't really have happy users, lots of cash, and making a difference in the world, but we have angry users, falling statistics, things that are breaking all the time. And somehow we need to amalgamate everybody to manage that and survive and also grow at the same time. Also, looking at the middle bit, the line of opportunity, i.e. the product, which we think is a straight line, is actually not. It actually consists of loads of different features that are sort of interconnected and interdependent. There's legacy features somewhere in there. Some of them kind of die sometimes, and we want to come up with new features, and we're like, how do we do this? So it's a pretty difficult problem. Before I move on, I just wanted to get an idea of like how many people work in design, development, and products. So could everyone that does design raise their hand? Quite a few. Product and engineering? Not that many. Cool. Sweet. Cool. So this is the question basically. How do we mitigate risk and manage complexity in order to get to where we want to, which is the desired outcome? The way we do this first is, according to the UXDX model and a lot of the things that we've all been talking about, is kind of wrap around our teams and try to have a holistic effort towards a goal. Instead of having a fuzzy desired outcome, we have well-defined goals that come from top down. And in the middle, we make data-driven and informed decisions. And we keep contributing towards those well-defined goals and getting feedback from what we're doing. So I don't know how many of you take data-driven decision-making very importantly in your organization. Some people do and some people don't. But from our experience, we found that every time we make quantitative and qualitative backed data-driven decisions, we've always made progress. And the thing is that once you've done that, it's not the end of it. You need to keep getting response from your users, from the way that you're doing, and then keep going. So this is what it should kind of look like, as opposed to kind of, I'm just going to show you the last one for comparison. So I'm going to give you a real-world example of how we did this at Reach and kind of like take you through the story so it's kind of easy to follow. So let's start with the first goal. So the goal was we want as many as possible readers to consume at least 50% of an article. Cool, that makes sense. Now we find that the readers coming in from social sources rather than search engines like Google consume more of the article, but this is only 5% of our inbound traffic. Something to consider here is that the way we knew this is because we had measurements in our article that gave events back to say how many people consume 25%, 50%, 75%. If we didn't have that, the first thing to do was to put in those markers and measure those analytics. Cool. So now we know that people coming in from social consume more of the article. What should we do now? Now we have a well-defined goal. Increase inbound social traffic to 10%. Sweet, how do we do this? So what can we do as a product design and engineering team as a whole? I'm just going to show you another example of how we get to the same question with a different overarching goal. So in this case, it's like we want to grow our inbound traffic monthly by at least 3%. That's also reasonable. Facebook has changed their algorithm and inbound traffic from them has dropped. So I don't know of how many people work in the media and news industry, but Facebook did recently change their algorithm last year, which meant that they wanted people personally to share more and they wanted official pages to get like less traffic via the things that they were posting. So that put us into trouble. So things like the Daily Mirror kind of posting things wasn't getting as much traffic as it was. So basically our inbound traffic from Facebook had dropped. Now we have another well-defined goal, which is increase inbound social traffic from other social sources. And we're back to the same point, which is what can we do as a product, design, and engineering team? So we want to increase inbound traffic from social sources and ideally from several social sources. Now we move on to the execution phase. Now the thing is that there's still a lot of uncertainty and quite a lot of opportunity and quite a lot of risk where we are now, but compared to where we could have been if we didn't have those well-defined goals, it's much, much less. So let's see how we can narrow this down further. So now we're like, okay, cool, we need to increase our traffic from social. What social elements do we have on the page? We've got some social follow buttons and we've got some social share buttons. Cool, which ones should be optimized? We don't know. Also, we've got loads of different kind of pages. We've got section pages, article pages, home pages. They all have social icons on them. Which ones should we test on? We don't know. Also, how do we go about this redesign? What is making the current social icons ineffective and how can we make them effective? A little bit lost. But to the rescue come a few things. And I think I would really encourage you to use these in your toolkit. So the first thing is go back to your well-defined goals. One of the goals that we set is that we wanted to quantitatively increase the amount of traffic by X%, basically. In that case, we need to maximize whatever impact that we're having. Social follow has way less of an impact than a social share in terms of generating traffic. For example, if I share something on Facebook, 5 or 6 people will post it, whereas if I follow a page, I have to wait for that page's post to come in my newsfeed and then I'll go and share it. It's a bit of a more long-winded process and it doesn't have an immediate turnover. Cool, we'll go with social shares. What kind of page? Again, this has a quantitative reasoning towards it. Most of our traffic comes into article pages. People want to share articles because that's what sparks interest. Cool, we'll go with that. Let's start with that. How to redesign. So this is where UX research and market research really comes into play. We looked at what other people were doing, and that is a really, really good thing to do. It's not copying, it's just being inspired. And often people's egos come in the way and like, oh, like, we're not gonna like follow other people, but honestly, like everything that people do is taken from each other, and it's fine to look at what other people are doing. So we saw that BuzzFeed does quite a lot of testing, and they stuck their social sharing bar at the bottom of the page. We're like, this is interesting. Our social icons are just at the top of the page. Maybe we should try doing that. Maybe we should make them sticky. And then the more UX research that we did, we found that lots of people were actually sticking their social bar. So we're like, okay, this has some kind of backend. Also analytics as well. This could basically also guide which aspects of the page people are reading, and that's something that we did initially. We said that we had scroll depth analytics to see how much people were reading with respect to where the traffic was coming from. Cool. So now we've got a little bit of an idea of how to start like an initial first test. This is, by the way, an actual screenshot of how we got to all of those ideas. We were lucky that we could brainstorm with journalists because they also work for the organization and they were giving us insight about users and how they read articles. But what we did is that back to the drawing a big blue circle around the team, we got everybody together on board. And that allowed us to really be divergent in the way that we were brainstorming. We used the little green dots to pick the things that people thought were the most important. Anyway, now we're like, cool. We should actually give people access to be able to share more and maybe put the share icons in more than one place and maybe also stick it. So the hypothesis was the share buttons are only in one place and we need to make them more available. Now the action is that let's make them more available and perhaps sticky. So I'm going to get into the details of how we set up tests in a little bit, and I don't want to overwhelm anyone, but essentially what you do is that you say, cool, I want to tweak what I have in A, B, and C way, right? So the first way I tweak it is that I've put the share bar not only at the share buttons not only at the top, but I've also put them in the middle of the article and at the end of the article. Oh no, it's fine, I keep talking. And then the second thing that we did is that we'll stick them at the bottom like BuzzFeed, but we'll also stick them at the top, and then we'll see what happens. And then eventually we got a winner from that test, which was essentially the top sticky bar. So we're like, cool, that satisfied our hypothesis, and we're gonna go with sticking the share bar on top. I need to change the slide right now. Hopefully it should come back. But yeah, basically the next part of this is that the way that we evaluated which variant actually won was using metrics. And okay, so could I also ask you guys, how many of you guys have done A/B testing and the work that you do? Cool. So within an A/B test, so for those of you who don't know what it is, it's essentially just doing what I said. It's sending out different versions of your product to your users and then measuring how they interact with those differences in a positive or a negative manner. To see how they interact with them, you need to set up metrics. So whether you use third-party tools or in-house tools, which I'll get into in a bit, you need to be sure of what exactly you're measuring and then how that contributes to your result. For example, if you just go with a vanity metric out of, like, by poking in the dark and you say time spent on page, page views, and that's it. For this test, time spent on page, if you spend more time on the page, that does not indicate that you're engaging more with the share bar. Often, if you spend less time on the page and you click share, if you find it in the middle of the article, that could be a positive thing. So you need to think back and really think about what metrics you're going to be using. We chose to go with A, the most obvious option, which is how many share buttons are people clicking on. So that's the primary one. Wow, that came back in perfect time. And we also wanted to monitor overall page views and time spent on page. Obviously, if overall page views are increasing because people are sharing more, that's a very good thing. So yes, choosing your metrics wisely is very, very important. So yeah, we got the top sticky one as the winner, and everything was all good, and we're done. But not so fast. The first step is often just the first step because it's the first step in figuring out what I need to do to get to my eventual goal. So as you can see on the left, we've got that sticky variant that basically won. After that, we wanted to test a few other hypotheses. We wanted to see how we should write the call to action next to the share button. Should we share this article? Should we share this? Should it be shared? I know that it seems like a very, very little difference, but you'd be surprised on how much that made a quantifiable difference in the results. We also decided to change the colors of the icons, keep them with the brand colors or keep them with the original colors of the social networks. And we also decided to change the number of icons that we have. So I don't know if you guys remember, but one of the initial things was give more options other than Facebook. So we thought that because things are moving a bit more personally, we use WhatsApp, we use Facebook Messenger, and we actually decided to pick and decided to put email, which was a bit of a rogue option, but after we did user research, one of the tools that I said helps simplify the discussion, we found that a lot of our audience are slightly older. They're between 45 to 60, and they're way more comfortable with sharing via email. And after we got the results from these tests, we found that the variant with email actually won. And we ended up going with that. So if you go to one of our sites, our share bar actually looks a little bit like this now. yeah, so it did take, and this was actually 2 tests broken up. It wasn't just a singular other test. I would go and break down it in terms of hypothesis and task, but I think we're a little bit short on time. Cool. So this is the winning variant, and we did it. But now I'm going to go into a little bit of more detail on how all of this works. So no test running. This is your version A. This is your standard product going to everyone. And with the test running, you have a slightly tweaked version, as I said. So who here knows the difference between A/B testing and multivariate testing? Cool. PWA man. Basically, what it is that, for example, if let me try to think of a very simple example. If you think that a blue button is going to be more engaging than a red button, and when you have to click like pay now and you're an e-commerce company, that's an A/B test. Version A has blue button, version B has red button. You know exactly what would make version B win over version A, i.e. the color. But often you don't want to just check one dimension. You want to see how a combination of differences make an effect. That is when you go into a multivariate test. So not only do you have 2 different things, which is the heading and the image, let's call the heading and the lower thing the image. Not only do you want to see which heading or which image is the best, you want to see the combination of which heading and which image is the best. A lot of third-party tools like Google Optimize have this inbuilt into that platform, and I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. I would highly encourage you to just even mess around with it, and you don't have to be a developer to actually get that started. You can just kind of change 2 things on your page, and then it'll set up the variants for you. Does that make sense? Cool. So I'm gonna get into a little bit of the building side of this, and I would heavily encourage like all product and design people to kind of also understand how this works, because that helps drive discussions with developers, and it makes you understand what is possible, what isn't. You need to be client or server side. From those who said you guys use A/B testing, do you guys use how many of you use a third party? Okay, 1 person. And in-house? The rest. Cool. So a lot of third-party testing tools are usually client-side, which means what actually happens is that after your page is delivered to the user, it's the same page, the same version that's delivered, there's a little bit of a script that comes about because of the third-party testing tools. It's like, hey, I need to make this change according to the experiment that you set up in my software. And then it blocks the rest of the site working, and it installs that script, and that implements the changes. This is usually suitable for more lightweight changes, like for example, changing colors of the buttons, more visual things if you're changing some CSS. But for a more heavyweight change, i.e. if you're implementing, like we did one test where we changed how videos were served to our users, we made them from just simple videos to more of like an interactive story feature. For that, you can't really have a script coming in and being like, hey, the video that's already on the page, I want to change that into a stories feature. You want to deliver a different version of the page to the user from the get-go. So that is server-side testing. You can kind of see that over here. The people that are building and making a difference are client-side, like it's on the page after it's delivered to the user. But server-side is when you actually, before delivering it to the user, you implement that change. So you really need to think about how heavyweight or how lightweight your change is. Also, how important is time to interactive? If you need to deliver the site to your users in like lightning fast speed, and you need to give them something as soon as they've asked for it, some companies have that as a priority, some don't, you cannot do client-side testing. Because if something goes wrong in the test and you lose out on time and that blocking script doesn't work, things aren't pretty. And server-side testing is better. But then the problem with server-side testing is that if you have a CDN layer, I don't know how many people know about this, all it is that it's a cache, and a lot of companies have it. If you have a CDN layer, then server-side testing gets a little bit tricky because you need to make sure that the CDN is on board with the variant. Because obviously, if the original version of the product is cached, the CDN's like, hey, I'm just going to give that version, and then you won't get the difference that you're trying to implement in the first place. So these are just a few concerns that you should keep in mind when you're deciding what kind of test to do. So I know I mentioned this quite a lot before. This is basically whether you should do an in-house or a third party. How many of you guys have used Google Optimize? A few. I I would really encourage you to check it out. There's a free version, and what I was saying earlier is that anyone can basically go to the current version of your site and make a little bit of a change. You don't need to know any HTML or CSS. And it really sets, the UI for it is really nice on how it sets up the variants. And what it has, what I think is really cool, is inbuilt analytics and reporting. So one thing that happens when you tweak your product and send out a new thing to your users, like you change the button from red to blue, is something called the novelty effect. Your users are more likely to click on something that's new and shiny in the beginning, but that's not representative of how effective it is. It's just something that happens. So when you're doing analytics in the end and you're analyzing which variant won, you need to kind of like keep that in mind and ignore that initial peak. Third-party software like Google Optimize does that for you, so that's very nice. It also tells you when you should end your experiment, and that's something it sounds much easier than it actually is. And it depends on how many people you're shipping the test out to. Many people say that 2 weeks is a good experiment time, but Google Optimize, often in a lot of our tests, have gone for more than 2 weeks, or around 3 to 4 weeks, but it tells you, hey, you should probably end your experiment now because the statistical differences are, enough. But that's something also to keep in mind. Also, resilience. When you're paying for something, I mean, the free version of Google Optimize is pretty good too, and Optimizely, but they've kind of taken care of that. So if you have an in-house A/B testing tool, it needs to be very well implemented into your architecture, and you need to be able to rely on it, because if, for example, you're shipping out a test to 50% of your users and something goes wrong with the test, you're in trouble. And also stakeholders. So I said that many people can use the third-party software because the UI is quite simple. So if you want to get everybody on board and engage with the test, it's a very good thing to do. And often if you built your own server-side kind of testing framework and it's behind the scenes, people in UX and design don't really know what's going on. But you can always tell them, and you really should. And also how close to production code. So this depends on whether you have an in-house tool or whether you're using a third-party tool. So in a client-side test, like I said, there's a little script that says, hey, I'm going to implement these changes on the page. You kind of define those changes when you're doing them in Google Optimize or in your own tool or whatever. Sometimes you just want to get the change out for the test. Now the problem occurs when one of the variants win, and you need to implement it into production. If you've just done something like very quick for the purposes of the test, you have an entire new development life cycle to implement all of those changes into production. So to the engineers out there and to teams in general, I would heavily encourage you to always keep in mind that this test could potentially win, and we want to cut our development time as much as possible. So write your code the way your production code is written. This doesn't mean that you write finalized or incredible code, but just kind of in the spirit of how things are organized in your production code base, and not just a super hacky solution, because literally every time we've regretted doing that. This is a slightly more technical thing, and it's a fun thing to do. I don't know how many people of you know about it, but using Chrome, you have this thing called source snippets. And this is what we use to just get the test quick started outside of Optimize, outside of like internal tools or whatever. What the source snippets does is exactly what I said that the client-side testing does. It basically just runs a script after your website is open. You can do this on any site you want. So you can basically pick any site, go to your dev tools, and select a source snippet, write a custom bit of JavaScript, and just be like, I'm going to change these elements, I can change the style of them, I can move them around, I can do whatever, and just run that script, and it'll do it for you. So I would really encourage developers to use that as a kind of sandbox to get started with the tests. And is that super confusing, or did that kind of make sense? It's basically just called source snippets. So anyone that uses DevTools will be able to find it in the tabs. And that's it.
Do we have any questions? Okay, we've loads. We'll start one here.
Do you use control groups, and we recommend to use them, meaning like you take 5% of all your users, if around 1 million, you actually don't do nothing. So if you go 6 months back and go to management and see, if you didn't hire me, you will actually lose this amount of revenue or sites or whatever.
Yeah, so basically, in as part of the test, like you have to have one variant that is the control, right? So I'll quickly just, it's best explained with this. So this is like normal life, but then you actually, out of all your users, you say let's test on 50% of them. Within that 50%, let's say that we have like 4 variants, right? So that means 10% get the original, and then 10% get each of the variants. So you basically you can compare with the control out of the box. And in Google Optimize, that's a default. You have to have your original version as a control so you can compare. And then what you can do actually to go back to the business and be like, hey, this made a really big difference, is that even though your stats from the experiment are just specific to that time, you can scale that. And just kind of like use the numbers and be like, I'm getting this many page views in 2 weeks from my new variant. This is how many page views I'm getting from my current variant, my current system, and then in 6 months' time, this is how it would project, and that usually works.
Yeah. Great. There was a question here.
Do you have any best practices or tools that are good for native apps?
So, I'm not aware of what you can do within the app framework, but you can basically use server-side testing for native apps, because native apps connect to a backend, right? And all the server-side testing stuff happens via your backend. So I would really encourage you to do it with that.
And Google Optimize is also server-side.
So Google Optimize is cool in the sense that the UI you can use is client-side, but you can also use it for server-side.
Okay.
So once you set up the variants, each variant, you have an experiment ID for your experiment, and you have other details that you can basically implement in your server-side code. So what's really awesome is that once you've done that, you can use all of that tools for reporting. It works the same way.
Okay.
No worries.
You said initially that you had goals for, that there were some goals for having users read the whole pages.
Yeah.
And then you started to focusing on sharing.
Yeah.
Was that 2 different cases, or was that within the same pool of goals, so that you actually had a goal to actually get more users to read the whole article, but also to get more shares?
Yeah.
And if you put the sharing on top, it will be more, or in the middle, it will be more tempting to actually share the story and forget about reading the whole article. So, what were the results? Did you kind of ditch the read the whole article and go for the high of more sharing, or what was the results of that?
Cool. So there's this longish question, so I'll try to answer it bit by bit. So, when we usually say things like, this is my goal, or this is what I have to do, like it seems very black and white and linear, when actually it's not, right? So goals is like a very vague term. And the reason why I use those fuzzy dots in the beginning is because there are a lot of things that we want to achieve. And often, the strategy that I took in that instance was essentially working from a top level goal and breaking it down. And like you said, sometimes what you get to when you break it down might jeopardize the top level goal. In our case, it didn't. We actually did have an indirect increase in the amount of people that were finishing to read the article. But in that situation, I think you actually stick to what you're working with. And then after you get the results back, if it seriously jeopardizes the thing that you were initially trying to do, you just don't do it. So the way that you monitor that is through metrics, right? So you measure the article consumption, like how many people cross 50 and 75%. You also measure the time on page, and you also measure the number of shares clicked. And then you basically look at your priorities. For us, it's basically as many page views as possible, right? And also as many people reading as much of the page. Those are 2 different things. So we saw how the test changes actually caused those things to change. And by looking at how those things kind of compared, we were like, this makes sense. So something interesting that happened was that overall page views were increasing. But when we looked a bit closer, and we found for the particular networks, it was actually a little bit more complicated. So Twitter and Facebook, there were less page views actually coming out of it, because, for example, if you share a post, less people are likely to click on it if you, for example, share on a WhatsApp or email or Facebook Messenger group. So we also did a derived metrics in that instance, and we calculated the density of people that actually came back to our site over the people that it was shared with, basically. So you do have to micro kind of like analyze every little bit and keep looking back at your initial metric and see, am I jeopardizing what I wanted to do in the beginning? No, let's keep going down, but you have to keep re-referring.
So you actually achieved both?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it worked out. Like, I'm giving you like a success story right now.
Yeah.
I could also talk to you about how we like massively messed up, but next talk.
All right. Thank you very much.
Cool, thanks.